We are so glad to have so many attend tonight. So welcome, everyone. We're so appreciative that you've come out on such an important topic tonight. And my name is Cindy Gustafson. I am the 5th District Supervisor for Placer County. And I want to welcome you all to be here tonight. We also have about 55 more on Zoom. And of course, we are recording tonight, so it will be available. Jeremy's adjusting my sound. Sorry, Jeremy. We will be recording it so you can reflect back or share it with friends, neighbors, others who might be interested and couldn't make it tonight. I wanted to make a few opening remarks and then we'll go through introductions. You know, we had scheduled this town hall, or at least held the date, between some of the county staff and myself some time ago. We needed to reserve this room. So we picked this date not knowing that the tragedy would unfold in front of our eyes in Lahaina. And certainly those reminders always hit all of us as to what can happen when we're not prepared, when we're not ready. And our hearts and prayers go out to those folks in Lahaina and the devastation that they're facing. But with that, we know, most of us that have lived here for a while know that we have been preparing repeatedly for many years, especially when you look at the Oakland Hills fire was my first experience with getting water systems ready post the Oakland Hills fires, but then especially after the Angora fire, where the two governors of both states put together a bi-state fire commission to make recommendations on what we do to avoid such catastrophes from happening. And with those recommendations, most have been implemented. We've reduced regulations on forest fuels and being able to thin our forests more quickly and easily. We have instituted a lot of improvements in our water systems. Thank you, Brad Johnson, for being in the back tonight. Talk about water if we need you. And then also looking at the fuels work that needs to be done and raising the funds that needs to go into our forest and working on that. A lot of other partners help us, not just the folks at this table. So we have 14 alert cameras stationed all over the basin, many of those funded through nonprofit funds. So we have nonprofit partners that are helping us protect this great area. And then, of course, our power companies, Liberty Utilities is in the back, and their preparations, because as we all know, unfortunately, high winds, trees, and power lines make for a lot of challenges in starting fires. So most recently, our Placer County Board saw the wisdom in changing our staffing model to include a full-time sheriff and fire in our OES department. So we call it embedding them in OES to make sure that we're doing more pre-planning, more organizing, more mapping, and more meetings such as this with their resources devoted full-time in OES. So there's a lot to learn tonight, and I am not the one to teach you. These people are. But I want to leave you with 4 thoughts. This community, I think, has some of the best preparations and best trained responders from counties, from local districts, and from CAL FIRE. We have evacuation plans. I know many people think there's no planning. These guys aren't thinking about this every single day. They are, and they have plans and scenarios, and they're going to go through some of that tonight. We do know the capacity of the roadways, but it changes when you're in an emergency. And so some of the media that you'll see is we don't know our roadway capacities. We absolutely do. And finally, 4th thing, each of us has a very important role to play in taking care of our families, ourselves, our properties. And when you take care of your property, you're helping protect the community. So I want to leave you with those 4 things. I'm sure others are going to say that as well. And augment those comments for you all. So with that, I wanted to make sure we start at the end of the table, Dave. We'll start with you, and we'll go down the row and tell you who's in front of you. I know we have name cards, but let's start, Dave.
Good evening. My name is Dave Atkinson, and I am the Assistant Director of Emergency Services for Placer County.
Lieutenant Ty Connors with the Placer County Sheriff's Office, and I'm the Law Branch for the Office of Emergency Services.
Ryan Wessner, Assistant Chief, CAL FIRE, Placer County Office of Emergency Management, Fire Branch.
Good evening. My name is Steve Garcia. I'm the unit forester for CAL FIRE's Nevada Yuba Placer unit. I manage the grant programs, prescribed fire, forest practice law enforcement, essentially anything to do with forest and resource management in our unit. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Brad Chisholm. I'm the Fire Chief of the Olympic Valley Fire Department.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here. My name is Steve Layton. I'm the Fire Chief for North Tall and Meeks Bay Fire Protection Districts.
Good evening. I'm Jason Gerbeau. I serve as the Fire Chief with the North Star Fire Department.
Hi, Chris Rarden, Truckee CHP Commander.
And good evening, Stephanie Holloway. I'm your Deputy County Executive here, designated for the Tahoe area.
Thank you all. And then I have a couple more to introduce that are out in the audience. Bob Couts, where is Bob? Okay, Bob is CAL FIRE's Assistant Chief, the Eastern Division, overseeing this area, and over the hill a little ways as well. Nathan Menth at the back table is CAL FIRE Captain, Head of Prevention, and is back there manning the booth if you have questions there. We also have Brandy Dunkel from, there's Brandy from our OES department. She's manning the booth back there. And then from Liberty Utilities, we have Shauna Mayo, the Fire Prevention Specialist, and Lee, I'm going to get this right, Kielbasa? Almost like a meat? Okay, I got that. Okay, and then Kristen Mann from our Placer County Sheriff's Office is also here. Thanks. So now it's my pleasure before I introduce the sheriff, I'm going to tell you a little bit about housekeeping tonight. So we know you have many questions, and we know there's also a lot of comments and opinions on this topic. So we're going to go through all of the presentations, and then we are going to rotate between people in the room and people online to ask questions. And then at the very end, we'll go to comments that people want to make after you've heard the presentations and the responses. And so with that, now it's my pleasure, and I was telling the sheriff earlier, I've lived here 40 years. This is the first time I remember a Placer County sheriff of our entire county being here for a public town hall meeting, or most any other meeting that I can recall. So please join me in welcoming our esteemed Sheriff, Wayne Wu.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. What makes Placer County so great is our community and community engagement, and so it really is awesome to see this many members of the community show up for this event tonight. Honestly, I feel like I'm a little kid at Thanksgiving and I haven't made it to the big kids table yet, so hopefully someday I can be up here with these guys. No. Unfortunately, we do have a large county, and I do have another engagement I have to get to back over the summit on the west side, so I won't be able to stay the whole time. I would like to introduce my undersheriff back there in the baseball hat. That's Shane Wright. He's the second in command of the sheriff's office, kind of our chief operations officer. He will be the whole time also to help answer questions along with Lieutenant Connors. And then our station commander, Lieutenant Don Nevins. He's in charge of the Burnt Creek substation up here for the basin, so they're here as well. Thank you to Cindy for having this event up here and bringing everybody together. And really, I can't thank enough all the people at this table. And there really are our public safety partners, because, you know, when I took over as sheriff, it really was a priority of mine, not just for the Tahoe area, but for this entire county, to really increase our level of communication, relationships, and collaboration with all of our first responder partners. We're in a day and age in this society, and the amount of emergencies and emergency management, and there's zero room for error, there's zero room for egos, and we really need to all work together as a team. And so I can't thank these gentlemen enough for being here tonight and supporting us with making sure we keep Tahoe safe. As Supervisor Gustafson mentioned, you know, one of the initiatives that I brought forward, and I thank the board for approving it, was really going into that unified command structure even before an emergency. And in our Office of Emergency Services falls under the county executive's office. It doesn't fall under the office of the sheriff. It is like that in other counties. It's not like that here. The Board of Supervisors really invested money, and they put an assistant chief from the county fire department and a lieutenant from my office full-time in the Office of Emergency Services, which I really think is a huge investment and going to continue to make Placer County on the leading edge of emergency management in the state of California. And to my knowledge, there is no other jurisdiction in this state that has that model in place. So I really applaud the Board of Supervisors for really putting their money where their mouth is. When I say we all have to work together, we really do, because we each have unique jurisdictional responsibilities when it comes to emergency management. And of course, we're here tonight really focusing on wildfires and evacuations. Pursuant to the penal code, really the evacuation process rests with law enforcement and me as the sheriff. But these are the experts when it comes to fire mitigation, fire behavior, and so we have to work extremely closely together to make good, smart decisions, and that's why that unified command approach is so important. With that investment the Board of Supervisors made, it allowed us, for the first time in my career here, to host a unified command training last month with members of all of these organizations. I think for me, it's the first of many. One of the unique things we did that we don't do, we provide that training on the west side of the county, but it's usually for supervisors and managers because they'll be the ones as incident commanders when an emergency happens. Because of the unique demands of the basin, we sent line staff out of our Tahoe station here. And one of the other things I'm proud of, when I talked about building relationships and collaboration, we had members of the Washoe County Sheriff's Office attend and participate, because emergencies and wildland fires don't understand jurisdictional boundaries or state lines. So it was very important to me, and I thank the Washoe County Sheriff's Office for coming over and participating in that training as well. Can you change the slide? So you're going to hear a lot of information tonight. You'll hear a lot of information on some of the evacuation planning and strategies that we utilize at the Sheriff's Office and how we work together with our fire partners. And unfortunately, in the Sheriff's Office and in Placer County, I hate to admit it, we do have more experience than I'd like to admit, because we have a lot of wildland fires. I can say we've done town halls like this throughout the county, down in Forest Hill, Colfax area, Lincoln, all these different parts of our county, and every community has concerns. And every community has unique challenges for us in an emergency, and Tahoe's no different, from ingress, egress, and obviously the tourism and the roadways, and the fact that we get tourists from all over the world that come visit this beautiful place. But some of the most recent examples, the mosquito fire last year was the largest fire in California. We were able to evacuate 11,000 people, and I'm proud to say the men and women of this organization, working with all of our first responder partners, did that successfully, and we didn't have a single fatality. The year before, we were able to evacuate almost 6,600 people in the river fire outside of Colfax. Two kind of different scenarios. The river fire was a lot more rapidly evolving, where we had a little bit more time with the mosquito fire, but both, I think, examples of what you're going to hear tonight and how we have tested it. We do believe in the planning process and the strategies that we put in place, and we are working hard and will continue to work hard to make sure we're on the cutting edge of what's evolving in emergency management. Supervisor Gustafson mentioned Lahaina. When all that comes out, there will be lessons learned. We will study those lessons. We will learn what was done right, what was done wrong as well in that incident, and we will make ourselves better. So thank you again for being here tonight. I appreciate all of you, and I'm glad I could be here, at least for part of the time. And with that, I'll turn it over to the group for the presentation. Thank you.
We are a regionalized professional emergency services community, and we communicate. We know each other. We have built-in relationships, and we know each other, and we trust each other. I want the public to trust us. that we know what we're doing because we do, and have proven those capabilities in the face of the mosquito fire, the Caldor fire.
The evacuation process is a huge part of this type of training, especially with the unique nature of the Lake Tahoe Basin. The relationship translates to the population by really timely emergency management, which equals safety to the public. Whether that's timely communications, timely evacuations, it enables us to make better, faster decisions.
There are limited ways in and out from the lake, and folks need to know that we've got them, we've got this covered, we are preparing, and we're ready to help when needed. You play like you practice, and practice is essential to building those partnerships, forging those relationships, and being able to work together when it's needed best.
We're listening to our communities. We know this is a big issue for them. They're concerned that we be prepared and ready to evacuate them if need be, or to respond to emergencies that may affect their lives. Thanks. Before we get going with the presentation, I just, some of you saw our Placer County Fire Chief on the video, Brian Estes. Brian and others from his team are over. They were asked to go to Maui and help on I'm going to get it wrong, Type 1 team, incident command, to help the people of Maui. So he's unfortunately left yesterday morning, can't be here with us tonight, but obviously we have a great team here. So just wanted to recognize his participation in this.
Thank you, Supervisor Gustafson. Ryan Wessner, Assistant Chief, CAL FIRE, Placer County Fire. We spoke earlier, Chief Wu spoke earlier, Sheriff Wu spoke earlier about local fire agencies and local responsibility areas. Up here, we have the state responsibility area, federal responsibility area, and direct protection areas. We share this responsibility with our local partners, which many of them are sitting up here to my left. Fighting fire in the Tahoe Basin is unique due to the weather that we have up here. It's higher elevation, tends to have more thunderstorms and wind events than the lower elevations. And the wind events are particular to, obviously, the topography of the area, the eastern basin, and the Truckee trade winds that come up seems like every day around 3 o'clock. One of the biggest threats to this area is a sustained wind event. The fuel in the higher elevations is typically a conifer timber model fuel. And then that usually starts about 6,000 feet, which is lake level, and then goes up to the 10,000 foot level where it gives way to the granite cap. The brush and the ladder fuels in this area are minimal. Note the picture where you can see the conifer trees go all the way down to the ground with the shadows, and then the snow brush is up on the shoulders of the ridge lines and not down low at the lake level. Having the record amount of snow that we had this winter led to, and the wet spring led to local fuel moisture contents being higher than normal. Oops. This is the fire hazard severity zone. If you look at the red around Lake Tahoe, the red is the very high fire hazard severity zone. This map has been out for many years, and it's evolving. 2023 map is up on the wall over there. What this does is it tells us that there is a threat in this area. It's identified, we know about it, and we've practiced and planned for events in this area. Whether it's fire suppression, fuel models, or fuel management, or building practices, all change in the very high fire hazard severity zones. Local fuel moisture content. This measurement was at the beginning of the month. We just had a measurement that came out this week. Didn't have time to put it up on the slide. But if you look at the green and the red, the green is the normal line, and red is the critical fire or fuel line, meaning that the fuel is at its critical state and will sustain burning once fire is put to it. If you look at the Manzanita model, the green line and the red line parallel each other all the way into October. Would you like to speak to any of this?
You're doing great.
Okay. The blue axis tells us where we're at, and it just shows that we're above normal for the very wet spring that we had. And if everything stays static, we shouldn't have a critical fuel stage this year, because we're going to turn into October, November, we get a little bit of rain, and then all those numbers come back up. Fire suppression in the basin. Again, we're going to go back to the topography. So Tahoe Truckee Basin is a mix of timber and granite that doesn't support fuel continuity. So when the fire gets going and starts burning up to the hills and going to the higher peaks, it's going to get that granite mix and the granite cap that comes out. The lake level is 6,000 feet, so we're already above most of the brush models that are much thicker on the west slope. For that, we have fewer red flag days throughout the summer than the valley. And when we do have red flag days, if there's any kind of fire weather watch or fire weather forecast, we send resources up over the hill and pre-position them and stage them in the form of strike teams of engines or dozers. When we do have lightning events, we have intelligent fire risk flights that go over the area, and they map where the downstrikes are at. As they're mapping the downstrikes, it puts GPSs on them, and they send them to us, and we can actually go to each one of the mapped downstrikes and see if there's a fire that started on that. We break up the area into quadrants and go out into a lightning plan and actively seek out any lightning strikes that might start a fire. Sheriff Wu spoke about unified command. We have a multi-agency response in the basin. At a high dispatch, we get 8 engines, and from those 8 engines, we have CAL FIRE Truckee and Carnelia Bay, the Tahoe Management Unit from the Federal Forest Agencies, and TNF Agency, that's Tahoe National Forest, North Tahoe Fire Protection District, Olympic Valley Fire Protection District, North Star Fire Protection District, Town of Truckee, and North Lake Tahoe Fire Protection District. So of those 8 engines, if we got a fire on the lake or anywhere down, once we get that initial dispatch, 1 engine from all of those agencies will start to respond to that. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Lieutenant Ty Connors, who will talk about evacuations. Did I forget anything? All right.
Thanks, Ryan. All right, moving on. So with the sheriff's office, we have our different areas throughout the county, obviously from Sac County line all the way up to Lake Tahoe. We do have our Burton Creek Station, so our as far as emergency response or jurisdictional area, the law enforcement agencies that are up here would be directly with our Tahoe Station, California Highway Patrol, and also any type of response needed above and beyond. We can also pull resources from our western side of the slope from the Auburn office, which has obviously a lot more resources as well to attend. But in turn, we have mutual aid. Mutual aid is a very useful resource, almost like the mosquito fire, river fire, all those fires. We use mutual aid because when it comes to doing evacuations of a large area, we do need the help. And we do have, and I'll go into as far as our unified command, but our mutual aid resources, we have the Truckee Police Department, Washoe County Sheriff's Office, El Dorado County Sheriff's Office, and Nevada County Sheriff's Office. And that's basically would be kind of those units that you see. And even if we even outgrew that, we can reach, farther down when it comes to, on the western side, when it comes to having more resources come for a multi-operational period, we may get units from Sacramento. So it just all depends on the time frame of that event or the operational periods. But those initial ones I just spoke of would be that initial response. When it comes to, like, say, the training and preparation, like the sheriff said, we did hold on July 19th, and you saw the video, we had our unified command training. In that unified command training, we had all the fire districts involved, we had CAL FIRE involved, and then all those other mutual aid law enforcement partners were involved. And what it does is that it helps kind of build those relationships that we're meeting each other, and it was an full 8-hour day of working together. And we mix the teams up so that way they can work together, and not for the first time during an event. They're doing it at a training, they're getting to know each other, so now you can get familiar with their faces. And when part of the scenarios and how we did it is we broke it down, and unified command training or the unified command is how at the start of any event is truck to truck. We get with our fire partners, they get with the law enforcement, and we back our trucks together and we go to work. And that's what this training that we kind of provided was as real as it's going to get, because it was in a parking lot. And the scenarios, we had a full dispatch center, they call them sim cells. We used 3 different scenarios based out of Tahoe, so that way we can work through the problems when it comes to evacuations. So we had one at Ward Creek, we had one in North Tahoe, we had one in Palisades when it came to a fire event, and we also had a civil unrest scenario. And again, going through those just allowed the guys to kind of work through the issues and anything that comes up. So again, if we have another incident, or if we have an incident, it's nothing new.
So when we're at the back of the truck, we have a fire truck, or the fire SUV, and the sheriff's unit. Fire SUV is talking to air attack. So we get 3 fixed wings on the initial response. 2 that are fire retardant dropping, and 1 that's an aerial command. And it's a spotter plane that flies in circles and is talking to us live. It's telling us exactly, they have GPS and all the fancy stuff up there too. And they're telling us exactly where the fire is and where it's going. And then if we get retardant drops across the head, they'll tell us if the fire is being checked up or slowed by the retardant drops. And as they're doing that, we're taking that live information, and the sheriffs have their maps out, and we're circling where the fire is going and what's in its way. And that's the basis of the evacuation. Coordinated evacuation, coordinated and timed.
Thanks, Ryan. But a lot of, even though we can do all the preparation and training for ourselves, a lot of it actually is a responsibility of the homeowners as well, being prepared, being ready, that when you do get that phone call of that you have to evacuate, that you're not thinking at that time, what do I need to take? You should already have kind of a pre-planned, being that ready, set, go. There's information in the back tables you guys can get when it comes to having kind of your go kit. And the biggest part of it is just, if you kind of work yourself through your own scenario of, like, if I had a fire here, what direction would I go? Knowing your primary routes out, knowing the primary ways to getting as far away from, the incident. Obviously, the fire is going to dictate what kind of direction we're going to be going, and the information I'm going to be talking about as far as sharing what information, as far as direction and evacuation routes. But again, it does land on the homeowner to being ready and being ready to go at an instant. So, when the evacuation notifications start going out, and you have a lot to do, or you have people that need assistance, maybe when you get an evacuation warning, that's the time to leave and not wait for the order to come through. This is one thing, and I know there's been some questions as far as how do we deal with the tourist population? How do we notify them of what's going on? And we're kind of coming up with this idea of kind of working the basin. Obviously, people can drive around the whole lake in a day, depending where they're staying at. But how do they know where in the location they're at in the basin, how they should get notified when in case of an emergency if people are vacationing up here for a couple of weeks? So we are going to try and work on getting bus stop flyers and different areas where a map as shown up here with a QR code, because pretty much everyone's got a cell phone. You go to a QR code and it's going to tell you what direction or what agency you need to go to. Is it Douglas County? Is it El Dorado County or Placer County? And it'll link you to that notification site to sign up for those notifications. That is probably the best way as far as when it comes to trying to get people being informed and staying connected. And, working with Airbnbs, hotels, and all that stuff is having this information there ready for them. And if they want to be notified, I can't force them, but if they want to be notified, we're going to give them that avenue to go to. Like we talked about with Unified Command, the developing the plan, that's where it starts. You can see where, again, that back of the truck, working together, immediately getting seamless information when it comes from our fire partners to law enforcement of the fire behavior and what we're going to do when it comes to, obviously, preserving life, and life safety is our primary goal. And how do we do that when it comes to identifying who's getting evacuated and who's not? So there's obviously very many ways that we're doing it within Placer County, is again, all our notifications that we provide. The biggest one right now, if you live in Placer County, is signing up for Placer Alert. Placer Alert is the way that you can register yourself. If you don't have a landline phone, is register cell phones. You can register multiple cell phones, and that way you can stay connected, that if you're down on the other side of the mountain, but there's a notification or something happening in your area, you'll get notified if you're within that zone area. So Placer Alert is by far the one and most important thing to do to get notified. If you have a landline phone and say you don't own a cell phone and you're within that zone area, then you'll be getting what's like a reverse 911. With all phone calls would be going into landline phones. But when it comes to like email notifications or text or cell phone calls, it has to go through Placer Alert for Placer County Sheriff's Office. And then obviously social media, we rely heavily on social media, between Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff. We blow it out when it comes to working with all our partners, with the county, with the Sheriff's Office, with the fire departments, PIOs, of getting that information out there as quickly as possible. Another thing that we have is what type of evacuations that we're doing, or what type of notifications you're going to get. And you're going to get either evacuation warning, evacuation order, shelter in place, and then last resort is temporary safe refuge. You should not hear any other type of terminology when it comes to a recommended evacuation warning. Those are the basics when it comes to what kind of notification you're going to get. Evacuation order, obviously, is we're displacing people from their homes, we're asking them to leave, and so we have other options too, is we really go door to door when it comes to an area. And when we go door to door, you're going to hear, cue the video, or siren, please. I know, I didn't. Thank you.
Evacuate immediately.
So that, it's on the high-low siren is kind of the state standard now, is that if we have anyone coming into an evacuation order zone, you're going to hear those sirens, and those sirens are basically the only time you'll ever hear that siren is during an evacuation order. You're not going to get pulled over by it unless you're in England, but other than that, so that's the only time you'll hear it. So again, giving you another audible sense of like, hey, we're coming, and we're coming to tell you need to leave. So that way, if you didn't get the notification, or you left your cell phone died, and you're out in the yard and you hear that siren coming, that's another step that we take when it comes to doing the notifications. Staying informed, obviously Ready Placer dashboard is your one-stop shop when it comes to Placer County and the event. So when you register for Placer Alert, you get your notification, you can immediately go into Placer Alert dashboard, and that is give you all the information that you need when it comes to road closures, the evacuation zones. Will have a map that shows that. You can enter in your address to see if you're within that zone. So all the information about the fire, everything. So it's a great one-stop shop when it comes to getting information. 211 with Connecting Point is another avenue that we're giving. We use them heavily on some of our events. Is if you have a question about something, you can call 211. You'll get someone on the phone, and they're going to help you with, after the fact, or at least giving you some information to tell you where to go. And then again, we have some other, when it comes to iPause or WIA, the wireless alert, wireless emergency alert. That is another kind of a last ditch effort that we're going to do, but that is kind of doing a radius. I don't know if anyone got notification from Nevada County when it came to their, some people did down there. Unintentional, but that's just a fact. When you use the WIA, when it comes to an alerting, it might bounce off an antenna, hit your phone, and it's going to tell you where it's getting evacuated, but it does create a little bit of confusion. So we will not use the WIA, unless it's a really a dire, kind of a last ditch effort for us, because we do rely heavily on our Everbridge with their Placer alert. Anything to add on that? So evacuation zone, I'm sorry, I get to talk a lot today, so hopefully you're. So evacuation zones and mapping, that's been the biggest question when it comes to why we don't use a third-party pre-zoning software. We do, again, we have a GIS component. We use what's called CalTopo. We have our GIS, which is within our own office. And when we create our zones, the way we do it is the fire, and the information we get from all our fire partners is the fire dictates the zone that we're going to create. Because the fire behavior, the direction of travel, how fast is everything, we take that all into account. Because the one thing you want to do is you want to systematically evacuate. If you have to go to evacuation order, you systematically want to do it in a way where you're not going to create your own bottlenecks because you evacuate too many people when you really didn't have to. And so that way we can kind of control giving people some time where we're under evacuation order. We build out evacuation warnings to at least kind of give you that heads up saying, hey, fire's coming your way right now. Don't worry about it. But again, it's definitely got to be in the tip of your nose when it comes to. We are working on a pre-incident map. We actually had a meeting today, just kind of a pre-incident map is where and we have, some of the PUDs and CHP and like the utility district. We want to get them to all put in information in this map. And what this map does is that it identifies critical infrastructure, it identifies choke points, primary or secondary routes. And what it's doing is that it's for anyone in mutual aid that has no idea about Tahoe, but they're having to make a decision or get in unified command for some reason, is that they know and it can identify stuff that's already been predetermined. You need to think about this if the fire's coming into that direction. High-density population areas like a mobile home park, where you might need to have more buses coming in there to help people come out. So we're just trying to identify all that, temporary safe refuge areas, temporary, as far as like a high schools or anything that we need to know and understand to give us the best decisions possible when it comes to doing something. So this is just kind of a quick little example. Again, this is from our scenario we actually used, but I actually used this too to kind of give, and I'm not saying that pre-zoning's bad. It's just that our methods that we go through and how we develop our zones, this is how it works for us. But one thing I don't have a pointer, but I got it right here. Oh wait, back. There we go. Oh, look at that. That's cool. So when it comes to pre-zone, is that all the zones throughout the whole county are put together, and they're designed ahead of time. And so I just designed maybe a couple of pre-zones like zone 1 and zone 2. This red line that's down here in my spotlight. So say that's a fire that happened, and that's the direction of travel that it's going in. And with information that I'm getting from in Unified Command, they're saying, hey, the fire's moving in this direction, rate of spread, and everything like that. Well, the only problem with one thing with pre-zoning is that as soon as that fire's touching it, and say this lower area here needs to get evacuated, well, this whole zone they push the button and they evacuate the whole zone. So there are ways you can kind of, if you need to edit it, but again, we do it from the very get-go when it comes to developing that map. And so, again, if you have to evacuate that whole zone, this is all evacuated. So if you look at this high area of population, we have to deal with all that, and do we necessarily have to? So again, with that communication with our fire partners, when we develop our zone, here's the zone that we want to create as an evacuation order, and this is an evacuation warning. So this was one whole pre-zone, but through the communication, we developed 2 of them. And so again, that helps with the systematic approach when it comes to evacuations and trying to do it, evacuating and not displacing people that we really don't have to. Does that make sense? So when we do develop it, so here's what it would look like. So the zone that we had right here, that's the one we're working on. It's not public facing. And then this immediately will go out onto our Ready Placer dashboard. And this is what you'll see. And this is where you can enter your address. You can go, hey, I don't know if exactly I'm in that zone or not. You can enter in the address, and it'll show you where you're at on the map to make sure where you're at on the zone. And then also, like say, it will tell you about, kind of give you the color codes, road closures, and all that stuff. All that information will be on that public forward-facing map. But again, with the, it all goes back to, sometimes I've had a few questions that, pre-zoning is going to make me safer or not. Again, you should always be prepared. I don't want to give zoning as a false sense of security, saying, hey, as long as I don't get called out, well, you should be ready at any time to be evacuated for any kind of major incident, and we're the ones that are going to work together to get you out safely. So when it comes to, obviously, there's been a lot of questions when it comes to limited access out of here, some primary route like 89 or 267. How are we going to deal with that, during July 4th, or when you have a lot of tourist traffic? How do we deal with a large amount of traffic? I hear it a lot, and, when I was raised here as a little kid, traffic's always been horrible. And, taking you an hour to get from Truckee to Tahoe, well, everyone's following vehicle code, right? They're not passing people, they're staying within the lane, they're not driving on the shoulder, they're just following the line. Well, again, that's why, traffic is created, because you're driving on a one-lane road down 89. So one thing we can do with assistance of our partners down here in CHP is we can control traffic through traffic control points and directing people in a direction, and we do a thing that's called contraflow. So contraflow, to give you an example, say this, you have oh man, okay, where's my thing? There it is. So say this is just a 4-lane roadway. You got your double yellow, 2 lanes of traffic going both sides. Well, now we need to move in a large amount of traffic in one direction. We can stop traffic coming in, and my fire partners could probably tell you, once we do a traffic control point and you don't allow people to come in because you got to get a lot of people out, it's amazing how much stuff stops. And so what we do is we kind of, in theory, we kind of move that double yellow line down, and now we have 3 lanes of traffic going out instead of the 2. And say on 89 or 267 is we go all the way to the shoulder. I don't need to stay within the white line. We'll use the shoulder as a lane, and we always could pretty much safely do 3 lanes of traffic going out 89 and still having 1 lane of traffic for emergency traffic coming in. So does that make sense when it comes to, again, if you think 3 lanes of traffic, that's I-80, when it comes to getting that amount out. And we also have to, obviously, you're going to have some pinch points like at the bridge or say the roundabouts that everyone loves so much, that those are areas that we're going to have additional resources there to try and get people through. You have anything to add on that? So obviously the repopulation process, that's a big thing. Now if you got an evacuation order and say the fire, you got an evacuation order because we thought the fire behavior was going to go, say it didn't get into that area, didn't burn it at all. Maybe the repopulation status or repopulating might be a little faster than a fire-affected area. But when it really comes down to it, all our partners with, utilities and all our partners here in the front table, we all get together to make sure that it's safe to go back home. And the worst thing you want to do is when you populate an area and then you have to go back and evacuate it again. So that's the worst thing you want to try and do. So that's why before and I know that's the the part where we get the most, like, when do I get to go back home? The goal is to try and get you back home within 72 hours, but, again, depending on the fire and depending on how much stuff was damaged, it might take a little longer. But again, that's all for you to be safe. We got to make sure the building department, everybody's coming in and checking those areas before we go in.
Our cooperators, PG&E and Liberty Utility on the back, it's easier for them to have their linemen and their infrastructure teams come in while it's evacuated. So if you have a bunch of power lines down and poles all over the place, get them in, give them room to work, and they can get the job done in one day, whereas if we have it repopulated and they're driving around people that are trying to get back to their houses, it might take a week. And on top of that, if there is still active lines that are being charged and they're in someone's backyard, and or if the water's out and the water's not safe to drink, we want the water department in there fixing all that stuff as fast as they can, so when it comes time to repopulate, you don't have to be removed again.
And and again, still relies on you. Obviously, when it comes to trying to get out in a situation, and say, depending on the fire, you might be driving through some heavy smoke, you might be driving through some pretty horrible conditions, trying to stay calm as possible. And again, we're trying to push you through as fast as possible. But one accident, can create a backlog, and we have to try and mitigate that and try and get the car off, as soon as possible to kind of keep traffic moving. So that's just, again, trying to remain calm in a very scary situation. It's hard to ask, but that's a key component when it comes to the success of us working together and working with you guys. So that'll be the end of my presentation. I'll turn it over to my esteemed partner, Dave.
Thank you, Ty. So a lot of the other things that are going on, you've heard a lot about response, a little bit about repopulation. There's a lot of other aspects of emergency management that go on, and one of the biggest ones is what we call mitigation. And that's really about what can we do to keep that bad thing, wildfire, flood, whatever it is, if it's going to happen and we can't stop it, what can we do to mitigate or lessen the effects of that thing on our communities? And you heard Supervisor Gustin, she shared some thoughts at the beginning of the presentation, and one of the big ones she talked about is, taking care of our properties. And that's really part of that mitigation. And so there's a lot of different things going on in the mitigation space, and all of our partners up here, especially with our local fire up here in the Eastern Placer, talking about defensible space, structure hardening, chipper program. I know Placer County has a chipper program, and I know Tahoe RCD also has a chipper program in cooperation with some of our fire partners up here. Placer County also has a defensible space grant program, again with some support from our Board of Supervisors. We were able to provide a little bit of funding for those folks who either through financial or other reasons have trouble taking care of their defensible space needs. We can provide a little bit of support to them. If you are so minded, and I certainly encourage this, get involved with your local fire safe council or start a FireWise community. Placer County is a leader in California in FireWise. We have 77 communities that covers roughly 18,000 homes. Now, obviously, 18,000 is just a drop in the bucket. We would like to see that get much, much bigger, and we really need your help to do that. Other things that are going on, we have our Regional Forest Health Coordinator working on some grant programs and some grant projects, things like that. Again, our local fire partners are up here are all working on community wildfire protection plans. There's one just being started in the basin from Tahoe RCD. I know Truckee Fire is working on one through some of the, I think it's the Measure T dollars. I know Nevada County is just starting on one, and Placer County is putting in for a grant as one as well. Also here in the basin, you have your EIP projects that your Tahoe Fire and Fuels team are working on. And again, those are all done in cooperation with our fire and other partners up here. And I know that even our other partners in the utilities and that, they're very focused on what can we do to harden those water systems to make sure that that firefighting water is available all the way through the firefight so that our responders have the best chance of protecting our homes and our properties. When we do our emergency planning, we recognize that as the sheriff mentioned at the beginning of our talk, every area has, unique features, and those are the things that we think about when we are doing emergency planning, whether it's topography, weather, the road network. And then, of course, up here, there's a pretty unique overlay of federal, state, and local partners, and I'm just going to recognize one of our partners, Town Truckee Emergency Manager there in the back, Bob Womack, is with us tonight. We also, fortunately, Nevada County couldn't be here tonight. As you can imagine, they are a little busy with their Emergency Operations Center, but I checked in with them this afternoon, and they're doing good. We also have other partners, such as in partnership with the Truckee Tahoe Community Foundation and the Town of Truckee and the County of Nevada and Placer County. We have helped them create a Community Organizations Active in Disaster, or a COAD. And this is a group of nonprofits who are interested in helping folks prepare for and respond to and recover from disasters such as wildfires. And their executive director is here in the audience. I won't ask her to stand up unless she wants to, but so a lot of partnerships going on, because we can't do this alone, right? No one agency is going to be able to take care of everything that needs to be covered, for these types of events. While we're pretty focused on wildfires here tonight, it's important to remember that when we do emergency planning, we take what we call an all hazards approach, and we're looking at things like earthquakes. They're rare events, but they're possible, and they're an event that has a big consequence if it does happen. Avalanches, a little more common around here. Flooding sometimes occurs, hazardous materials, right? These are all things that happen occasionally, and maybe they don't cause a large evacuation. But the beauty of how we do our emergency planning is it's scalable. And so whether we're evacuating a handful of people or an entire community, the process is the same, so that when we do it, it's all done the same. It's the same process, it's the same procedures, so that things work well every time. We're also working on using some new software to help aid in some scenario planning as we continue to look at different ways that we can approach how we conduct evacuations. What are the pros and cons of smaller groups more frequently, or maybe closing certain roads? And if there are certain roads that are just critical that have to stay open, we can identify those, and then those feed back into our mitigation program. If we know a certain road is absolutely critical to evacuating a certain community, that's going to go back into that mitigation plan, and we're going to go look for funding for that, whether it's from our board or hopefully through a grant or something like that, to make sure that that work is getting done. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we're out in the community, like tonight, helping you understand what we're doing and helping you understand what we really need you to do to help us with this in terms of taking care of your property, being prepared, right? Whether it's go bags, and we've got a few things to help you get your go bag started in the back, so please visit the tables when you're all done with questions tonight. But if you do have questions, if you have need of information, there's opportunities for that, whether it's the Ready Placer website. And then, of course, Placer County is fortunate that we've invested in a 211 program. And so if you don't feel comfortable getting on the website, or you want to talk to a person, dial 211. And they will connect you with someone who can connect you with resources or help you understand a certain program or understand a certain facet of something. So there's lots of opportunities to reach out and get educated and get the information that you need. And then, of course, if you do not getting your questions answered, there's an opportunity to contact us. And that first one there is we have a fire ready email address and a phone number. If you have questions about defensible space, or how to start a fire-wise community, or questions about anything related to that, call that number, email there. We're happy to talk to you and get your questions answered and get you connected with resources. So we really want to make sure that you are as well informed and I would say, well armed, right? It's a little bit cliche, forewarned is forearmed, but it's true. Take that time to educate yourself and reach out to us. That's what we're here for.
Thanks, Dave. And I want to share, I know he ran through, and Ty, you ran through some scenarios. I got to watch them firsthand in person in Forest Hill as they made the decision to start evacuating Forest Hill. That was a real-time scenario that I got to watch play out, and watch the coordination between the local fire district, CAL FIRE, and our sheriff's department making that call, and how they phased that evacuation and evacuated, unfortunately, 11,000 people, and many of those people were out of their homes for 2 weeks. Now, the good news was very few homes were destroyed in that fire, and no lives were lost. But we went through a lot to get those people out, and it was a one-way in, one-way out road, two-lane road, and so I got to see how well this works, and I know for any of us, once you see and watch what happens, you have more confidence in it. So I just want to kudos to them, and I was so glad to have been invited to be out there and get to watch that. We have some other people that are helping us put this on tonight, and we're going to go to questions in just a minute. Sophie Fox, my chief of staff, back here has a microphone, and so when it comes time to questions, she'll be passing that around. Lindsay Romack with the CEO's office is right here. She's monitoring our online questions. We have about 150 online now, and so we're going to rotate back and forth between that. Our incredible IT guys back there, Jeremy and Vasily, I didn't recognize you before, but I know people want to do these hybrid meetings. Thank goodness you don't count on me to run the technology, right? That younger and more qualified people do that. So thank you for doing that. And I think also from our PIO's office, we have Eric and Stephen here that are also helping with the Facebook Live and other ways we're recording it. So with that, it's time for questions. And do any of the local fire districts want to speak up at this point or just respond to questions? Okay. I just want to thank them for being here because day in and day out, they're the first on the job, right? They're the first ones to our homes in our community and know that. And that's who we depend on day to day. When we heard the emails, it was never about what they do. It was about how do we get out of the basin? And so that's why the focus on tonight was on evacuation and kind of the more catastrophic events. But they're the ones we count on day in and day out, take care of our communities. So with that, Sophie, I'll look for a raise of hands. And does anybody have a question? Okay. Sophie will bring you the microphone. We'll take a few from the room, and then we'll go to those of you online, and we'll ask you to raise your hands in just a minute.
Hi. I am wondering if you could speak to how you would utilize, utilize the lake, because our family has 2 points of where to meet, and the second one would be the lake. But watching what happened in Hawaii, and then is the Coast Guard involved? Would people get picked up? What do we do if we are at the lake?
So we do have our, like say, do you have a Coast Guard? And then also we have our Marine 6, which is our sheriff's boat, which is up here. Again, and I thought about that, Dunkirk. I mean, when it comes to, getting people out, if we really had to use the waterways when it comes to stuff, and that's where in the EOC or with us, when we're activated, when it comes to finding out what the need is under Unified Command, they're like, hey, our area now is a waterway rescue. Well, then that's when we started reaching out to our other resources, our other agencies to come with boats, the Tahoe Queen. I mean, there's a lot of different options that we can do when it comes if we have to do some type of water, shore rescue.
I'll speak on that. It's not ideal situation to go into the water. I don't think we have enough boats that we can rescue as many people. Plus, if we have a fire, it's a wind event. And when we get 50, 60 mile an hour winds, we could have, the lake could look like an ocean. So more than likely, if there's a large fire, we're going to have waves. So that's not our first option, to be quite honest with you.
Let's get the microphone. Sorry, we have to use the microphone so people online can hear and those,
I was just curious because the boat ramps are all locked unless they're open. So is there any plan to unlock those boat ramps so those of us with boats, if it was something we needed to do, would have the option to do that?
Everybody's looking at themselves. I'm the one who operated a boat ramp, and I'm retired from that job. But I will say that that's a great idea and suggestion that we can talk to our partners about, because I don't think we've thought of that scenario. I hadn't till now, have any of us? So we can follow up on that with our partners at the two public utility districts who operate our, those boat ramps.
And like say during an emergency, I mean, this is where, you know, life safety, go to the tool shed and get bolt cutters to cut them right off. I mean, there's a certain point where you have to do whatever it takes to save yourself. And if you have to get out and you have to ram a gate or do whatever, I mean, that's, again, the last ditch effort, like the chief said. I mean, that's just a last ditch, option that we really want to get into. But if you have to make that decision, that's when you start thinking outside the box and take care of it.
If I could add to the boat lake kind of question, we all know like on a weekend, just a normal weekend, people trying to deploy their boats, it's a long line. So think about if all of a sudden you've got a little panic situation, people trying to get boats. So my suggestion would be come up with another plan. A thought is the lake, but maybe consider like pre-plan your neighborhood. Where's there a big beach area that you can use as a temporary refuge area? As Chief Layton said, it's probably an even wind event, so you need wind and you need that fuel. So find a beach area that's separate from fuel, so you might be getting some ember cast on you and stuff, but at least you'll be in a temporary refuge area, and it's probably a better bet than actually getting in the water.
Okay, let's take one more in the room, and then we have some online, and then we'll come back to the room.
Hi, I live in Tahoma, and I am there. I believe there's Meeks Bay and North Tahoe Fire are combining somehow. I don't know if it's called combining. I don't know what the word is. But anyway, I am concerned about, I live 5 houses into El Dorado County, and we rely on North Tahoe Fire and Meeks Bay for our services. But we're not part of Placer County, and are you going to include us in these evacuations, or are we to listen to El Dorado? Personally, I'm not going that direction. I'm not going over Emerald Bay in a fire, because I can't jump into the lake off of Emerald Bay, okay? And so I want to know what kind of cooperation, or are we going to join the West Shore with the North Shore on these evacuation plans. Also, I really don't think we can get all of us out in 2 lanes. I think we're going to have to jump in the lake. That's my personal opinion. I've tried to get, if you've ever even tried to get to Squaw or Reno on a weekend, it takes hours. We'll all be burned up in our cars, just like in Hawaii. Thank you.
I'm sorry that you're thinking like that. Hopefully, we'll never have to evacuate all of us all at one time, and I think that's what we saw in Forest Hill and Colfax. But does anybody want to take on the El Dorado County coordination? Because I think...
Sure. So on the onset of the fire, we're going to go into what we were talking about earlier, unified command. And the fires don't care what boundaries or what counties they're in, but so that's why we go into the unified command, and we'll go in with our partners in El Dorado County. And it's a seamless, because they're going to, when we do our initial resource order, we're going to order 10 type 3s, 25 type 3s. The dispatch agencies are going to talk to each other. They're going to go CAD to CAD, and they're going to get 10 engines right off the crack from El Dorado County. So we'll be in unified command with them.
And the same goes with the law enforcement. Obviously, when it comes to evacuations and doing the notifications, falls under us. Now, if you live in El Dorado, then obviously they're the jurisdictional authority when it comes to providing those evacuations and making sure that you're signed up with El Dorado. But again, when we're in that unified command, we know where the notifications is at to be on our side or their side. And that's where you start that communication with our fire partners and fire behavior to do that as fast as possible.
So I'll talk about jurisdictions for a minute. I did write some stuff down because I thought I might anticipate this question. So I will tell you, here locally, all fire agencies are committed to aggressively attacking all fires that start in the basin, which brings considerable resources to bear. Every fire chief in the basin has signed a document committing all resources to assist federal and state agencies in suppression of every fire that starts in the basin. In simple terms, that means we will empty our barns. We will commit all of our resources to assist our neighbors, and they will do the same for us. So regardless of where the fire starts, we have committed regionally to attack the fires, regardless if you're in El Dorado County, Placer County, Nevada, wherever you are. We will send the resources that are necessary to help fight that fire. And I hope that makes kind of sense.
I don't think you really addressed part of her question. Everything
Wait, I'm sorry, sir, can you hold? We'll get a mic to you. I'm sorry, because people online can't hear your question unless, even though we can hear it here, they can't hear it unless you're mic'd.
I'm just thinking you guys must have, and women must have thought of this and talked about it. What happens when there's an accident or that it's just a traffic jam and everybody's in their car and the fire is being blown quickly? Is you lead people down the road, or should people jump out of their cars and hopefully they got their bikes on the bike rack? Or, what is the plan if you really are stuck on the road, or if you drive up to 267 and it's gridlock? It's a tough, sometimes there isn't an answer, but I'm sure you guys have thought about it.
I think one thing you don't want to do is panic. And you want to try to remain cool, calm, and collective. And that's going to happen. There's smoke. People aren't going to be able to see. I would say, your car's safer than being out of your car for sure. And you're not really going to go anywhere, being out of your car. You might be in your car for an hour or so just getting out of the basin. So that's what we say. Make sure that your car has full fuel. Make sure you have a gallon of water in there. Make sure you have some snacks in there, so if you're waiting in your car. But we will do everything we can. We understand that could be a possibility, but we can't prepare and plan for everything.
And like say, when it comes to gridlock, whatever, one thing to know and understand your area too, and just kind of give you an example, when I went to Paradise and Concow, is one of the deputies, there was a traffic accident. There was a lot of backlog. He was there trying to evacuate people, and he had about 40, 50 cars that he was dealing with. He knew of a meadow that was on fire, but it was a low fire, grass fire. He had everyone follow him into that. It was that temporary refuge area where they had to wait it out, and he said it was a horrible experience. But, like Chief was talking about, you're getting hit with embers and everything else, but everyone stayed in their car. But that's just like one of those options where it's like, okay, last-ditch effort, knowing your area, if you're by a high school or you're by the beach or whatever, it's just kind of considering those. If we need to use it, we will. But like Chief said, staying in your car, not panicking as much as possible. But we're going to try working with our fire partners or with our CHP and the traffic control points and trying to get that traffic moving as best we can.
And I could add to that. So if you reflect back on the slide that was up there on the sequential approach to the evacuations, if you know of events going on, if you have the ability to leave the basin, if you've got a second home or family or somebody somewhere else, take that opportunity if it's not critical for you to be here. Also pay attention to the different levels of evacuation warnings. That's the capacity is baked into the pre-planning for these evacuations. That's why we have the warnings, that's why we have the orders, and then the various levels from there. So if you see a warning, it doesn't just mean like, hey, get your ready bag, go. It's like, if you have the opportunity, if you don't need to be here critically, then take that opportunity to leave, lessen the impact should something get more severe.
And then like Palisades is another, one big that comes out. One of our scenarios that we ran is we may have an evacuation order for one part of the, Olympic Valley, but then, some of the other places might be asked to be shelter in place because we figure with the traffic and everything that's going out, it's actually safer to have them stay in their hotel room than it is to evacuate out of the basin based on the fire behavior and kind of what's going on. Shelter in place is another thing that we may tell you to do. It's just safer to stay.
And that's another question that I'm going to ask my air attack when they're flying over is, I have people that are in vehicles that need to get out. What's the safest route? And they have a rolling map, and they're going to say, go out to First Street, take a left on Third Street, and take Dog Bar to the right. And as they're doing that, I'm standing next to my law enforcement, and they're sending units to those areas to set up that route of travel. And it happens as fast as us arriving on scene.
Yeah, just to piggyback that from the CHP side of things, the squad or Olympic Valley situation in particular, you're seeing that everybody going to one parking lot. And that parking lot is what creates the backup. That parking lot fills up, and then it just backfeeds up out into 89, and then you have cars that have to turn around on a 2-lane road. This situation, we're going to stop a lot of traffic from even entering the basin to alleviate some of those pressures, and then everything's going out. And we're sending officers to those choke points that we know from previous experience, 4th of July fireworks, the different races that we run in the basin, all these different events. They're actually great little trials for us to know where are our choke points, where do we need officers, what works, what doesn't work. And kind of like fire, once our resources in Truckee are exhausted, we're going to start asking for more resources to come from our adjacent areas, Gold Run, Quincy, South Lake. And if we have to, we'll reach out to Sacramento, request a special response team that brings anywhere from 125 to 150 officers to the basin to help people get to safety.
Thank you all, and I know we can talk more about that. We do want to go to an online question. If some of you have comment cards or questions written down, if you'll just raise your hands with those, and Sophie will pick those up, and Lindsay, we'll go to you to moderate some of the online.
Sure, we'll start with a few written online questions and then maybe go to one or two people who have their hand raised. There's been a few questions about the Caldor fire and what we learned from that, since it seemed to be a lot of gridlock in South Lake Tahoe when South Lake Tahoe was evacuated. So just a question of what was learned and what might be done different if a similar situation happens here.
Well, again, as far as the Caldor fire, I wasn't part of that fire when it came to it, but again, learning about, the contraflow part of things, when it comes to trying to get a lot of traffic out. And, obviously it's hard to base, you learn a lot of things when it comes to that systematic approach when it comes to evacuating and trying to do it in smaller increments if possible. Again, knowing and understanding that communication with our CHP and partners, identifying those choke points that we know are always going to happen. Like say with 4th of July, and up here, there's so many people. Of the best way of trying to get people out as fast as possible. Again, it's always goes down to the basics of communication and unified command with our partners, fire behavior, and how we're going to mitigate the problems with trying to get a lot of people out. Working with our CHP partners, traffic control points, and contraflow is the one way of trying to get a bunch of people out at one time.
And I can add to that. So I wasn't on the Caldor fire, I was on the Dixie fire at the time, but I had the opportunity to attend the after-action review for the Caldor fire. And they had plenty of lead time, and everything was set, everything was sequential. They were going to pull the trigger here, then here, then here. They had all their routes all set up. They had officers at the choke points. Everything was good to go. When they pulled the trigger for that first one, it was a system error that happened, and it pulled the trigger on the entire area. So everybody got the signal at the same time. That issue's been scrutinized, it's been studied, it's been reviewed. It's fortunate that the fire didn't come in with the veracity that they were expecting, and everybody fared okay. But that's, again, like our CHP friend said, it's like these are all opportunities to learn, and we've taken that into account. And so that's why you heard of so much congestion going on in the South Shore for that.
Another question is related to road construction. First, what happens, in the areas where maybe there's lanes blocked off if you have to evacuate through that area? And also, is there ever any postponing of construction on red flag days?
That would be a great question for our Caltrans partners or road partners. I don't know that they do postpone construction on red flag days. That's a great topic for discussion. But I do know again, just from experience and different incidents that go off in our region of responsibility, anytime we have an issue where we need road construction pulled, they pull it. If we have a pursuit coming through that could cause danger, they'll pull the construction. If we have an incident that requires us to divert traffic and cause increased congestion through the construction zone, they'll pull the construction. So I know our partners over at Caltrans and with roads have no problem pulling their construction zones when there's a need for it.
Thank you. All right, we will go to a person who has their hand raised on Zoom. So Margaret Boyd, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question. Margaret Boyd, if you want to unmute yourself.
Sorry, I have no question.
Thank you very much. We will lower your hand. All right, we'll go to, there's a few more hands raised. Judith Tornice, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you very much for all the information and really appreciate the efforts that are being implemented. I think my question was answered. I was concerned about the Caldor fire and the South Shore lineup to get out of town. And I think that was previously answered. So thank you very much.
Thank you. One more online. Ann Nichols, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate all of this. I know how hard you guys work and what an excellent job you'll do if there is a fire. But my question is, with all the development being promoted by Placer County and TRPA governing board, with 14 more projects, we have a 2-lane road. And what they have as a takeaway from what you say, and this was from Vince Honigman at governing board, he says, they're not that concerned about evacuation. Was that a true statement of how you guys all feel?
And I'll take that one as a member of the governing board and a member of the Board of Supervisors. I think the size and scope of those projects is something we should do a whole town hall on that's separate, because I do think I think there's a lot of concern. I want to assure you that these are redevelopment projects. This is not huge amounts of new units. We have very strict caps in the basin. So we will do a town hall just on that topic, because I know how concerning it is to people, and we'll lay out all those numbers. But certainly we coordinate on every single project with our fire departments and our sheriff's department related to first response. So I can assure you of that, and we will do a town hall on that next. Let's go back in the room. Raise your hand, please. Okay, Sophie, you got to run.
I have two questions. One's kind of micro and one's macro. The micro question is, any more thoughts or plans or ways of getting more fire hydrants for all of us? I know some communities have them, but they certainly don't reach everybody.
Well, I'm looking behind you to Brad Johnson,
Oh,
who
okay.
is the general manager of North Tahoe PUD, and he's volunteering to answer that one.
Great. And my second question later is talking about the Caldor fire. If I've missed it, I'm sorry. There hasn't been much talk about the interaction with the Forest Service and their firefighters. We got lots of other agencies here, and there was a little bit of scuttlebutt that there was some friction during Caldor between the Forest Service and CAL FIRE. So anyway, I think we have to work with them too, right? Ultimately, yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. My name's Brad Johnson. I'm the general manager of the North Tahoe Public Utility District, and I am a civil engineer, most of my career focused in water infrastructure. And I'm also pleased to speak on behalf, something unique here in the basin is there's a formal working group of all the water purveyors called the Tahoe Water for Fire Suppression Partnership. And much like this group of uniformed first responders, you've got a sea of water nerds working away, thinking about water infrastructure across the basin and across boundaries. Angora was a wake-up call for the water purveyors here in the basin. When you look at the American Water Works Association's, guidance, water professionals' guidance on water for fire flow, it traditionally looks at it from a structure fire standpoint, ensuring you've got adequate storage, you've got adequate hydrant placement to put out that singular structure. Even a fire-alarm fire in an urban environment is a structure fire, and so it's static. You have the apparatuses come in and you hook up, and then you're drawing your system down. What Angora showed is that water infrastructure is really a bulwark. It is one of the legs in your community's resiliency to wildfire and helping defend your community against wildfire. So the engineers at all of these different water districts began to rethink how we planned our projects and rethink the hydraulic design of our systems in order to be a robust and reliable system for wildfire, so that our first responders can camp out in our communities and keep that fire in the woods and put out those spot fires as those ember falls occur. So we're investing heavily. We are thinking about storage, enhancing our storage, focusing on our hydraulic choke points. As you drive through the Tahoe Basin, it's fairly contiguous. But underground, from a water system perspective, it's not. It's more of a series of islands, if you will, of non-connected water systems. That's nature of how the Tahoe Basin was developed from a water infrastructure standpoint. And so we're working to remove those choke points so that we can move water from one system to another, from one area to another. We're installing isolation valves so that if an area is overwhelmed, like a tourniquet, we can turn the water off to that system to ensure the water will flow to where the firefighters need it. And so in Angora, the South Tahoe PUD had kind of a traditional system. There was a hydraulic choke point. They accommodated for that hydraulic choke point by adding significant storage, and then they had good fire hydrant placement throughout Angora. But when the fire came in, it burned South Tahoe's 2 tanks to the ground, and then it overwhelmed that small hydraulic choke point, and they couldn't push enough water into the system. And so the firefighters pulled out, and you lost 300 structures in Angora. Fast forward to Caldor. Fire poured into Christmas Valley. It poured into an area where South Tahoe PUD had invested heavily, and they literally poured it on. And so the firefighters were able to camp out in Christmas Valley, despite the fire jumping over that community and burning up both sides of that canyon. Not a single structure was lost in Caldor. So water plays a role. So what are we doing? We've raised your rates. We're investing heavily in our water infrastructure. And then importantly, we're partnering with the federal government. Unique to the Tahoe Basin, we are getting federal dollars coming in, and we're pouring that back into the community. For residents of North Tahoe and Kings Beach, you are seeing water infrastructure go in the ground on Rainbow, Golden, and Seacline, and we've received federal support to help fund that. So we're deploying the hydrants, we're doing those interties, and importantly, we're now at the table. We have, all of us have woken up to that water infrastructure's role in that wildfire resilient community. So we're investing heavily. There's still a lot of work to be done, but we're working on it, I guess is the key statement. And I did want to echo, the evacuation discussion is important, but something unique to the Tahoe Basin is this concept of wildfire resilient communities. And so this group, the Tahoe Fuels and Fire team, the water purveyors, all of the agency partners, we're gathering together, working to be in front of the next fire. Comprehensive fuels reduction and forest management, home hardening and defensible space, fire-wise communities, and then water infrastructure. Those 3 come together. And what that means is when wildfire comes to the basin again, it is not catastrophic wildfire. It is manageable wildfire. And it buys us time to be able to evacuate, robust water infrastructure to keep the fire in the hills. So a lot of upfront work is going on to ensure this is a wildfire resilient community.
Okay, and thank you, Brad. And then her second part of her question, I do know that you work closely with the Forest Service, and depending on where that is, does anyone want to I don't know that anyone. Well, Ryan, or about the Forest Service there being some tension between the Forest Service, let me get your question right. Okay, Bob.
I'll take this one, so.
Okay.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Bob Counts, Assistant Chief. Yeah, we do work very closely with the Forest Service on a daily, weekly basis. They attend all of the local meetings that we have, whether it's regards to fuel reduction, fire pre-planning, stuff like that. So, and they were at our training at Olympic Valley for a unified command. So, yes, we do work very closely with them. I can't speak as to the relationship on the other side of the lake, on the south side. That's a different CAL FIRE unit. But knowing them, it's as good or if not better as it is over here. So we do have a very good relationship with them.
I think I'll just tear off Bob's comments. People don't necessarily understand until you explain kind of the dynamics with our dispatching. Is that for the west side of the lake, we have 2 dispatch centers, one in Camino and one at Grass Valley. And those dispatch centers are actually, they're co-located, Forest Service and CAL FIRE, literally sitting across the desk from each other. And so the tempo, the cohesion, the cooperation literally starts at the moment of a dispatch, and they're immediately working with each other from that point. But one of my functions is what we call it the pre-fire planning division. And so I'm thinking about things prior to a fire. I haven't had a lot to say here because you're really talking about the point where a fire starts and then what do we do then. My role is to think about what we do before a fire, the wildfire resiliency, the pre-planning, right? And to kind of highlight some of the cooperation in the basin here, there are numerous weather stations that are used as kind of the guide for our dispatch levels. They're used to evaluate the weather conditions over the entire fire season, and those weather measurements are uploaded by satellite. It's collected and then used for statistical analysis, where we take all of those fire ignitions and evaluate at what point during the season and at what point during the day are we going to see a change in the dispatch levels. And those dispatch levels are driving how many fire engines, how much aircraft, right? And so in the basin, there's a single, what we call a fire danger operating plan. The fire danger operating plan is that statistical analysis where you take the individual ignitions, all of the weather data, and you evaluate what is the source of the fire problem and when are the trigger points that we need to change either the dispatch levels or some potentially high risk event that causes us to have to make some decision. It's really a fire business decision model that we use, okay? And so we're working with the feds across the board. We're also working with the Forest Service by providing grant funding to do various treatments on their land through the California Carbon Investment Fund. So truly a cohesive strategy to managing the wildfire risk in the basin. Thank you.
I would say we kind of have the motto amongst the fire and law enforcement is no matter what patch you wear, no matter what agency you work for, we're here for a common goal. And that goal is to protect you. And we do that. And so I don't want to get sideways that we don't get along, because we absolutely do. We have to, right? That's one of our strengths is that we do get along so well, and we do have common goals. So I hope that answers your question a little bit too.
Okay, more questions. Sophie?
Hi, I feel like I'm jumping in line here. There were a few other people that had their hands up. I'm sorry. Hi, my name is Sarah. And just first of all, I want to say thank you guys for creating the coalition that you have, because it's a really, cooperation is the most effective way to get anything done. So thank you for that. On the jumping in the lake thing, is it recommended to residents to, say, have fire blankets and gas masks in your kit for your go bag? Because if you get stuck somewhere, smoke inhalation is a real thing, and fire blankets can help prevent you from getting pretty badly injured with ember fly. And then I just had one more question, and that is, on the mitigation front, is there any more aggressive moves towards actual mitigation within the basin, removing, like fuel removal and controlled burns and things like that? Because I know that there's been a lot of resistance from some directions to say things like controlled burning, because nobody wants it in their backyard. They don't want to smell smoke, whatever. But it's something we need to do. So, a little smoke instead of really intense smoke. That's it.
We're kind of arm wrestling over here about who's going to answer the question, but I find it really interesting that you paired those two things together. I've talked to a lot of people post campfire that were forced, to survive. They had to make some really hard decisions. And there were some crazy stories that came out of that, and it was really about survival. People would get out of their burning car and climb into a culvert pipe in order to prevent themselves from being burned, and probably do just about anything to save their children, right? But for whatever reason, we don't seem to want to take those kinds of drastic measures when it comes to managing the forest and doing mitigation, right? Like the conversation about having to evacuate, possibly being burned in your car, should I have a gas mask and a fire blanket? Well, maybe we should have an environment where we don't even have to evacuate because it's resilient to fire. Fire can pass through the landscape and not do damage, not kill people. Now, is that a realistic, it's probably like a unrealistic goal for my lifetime, because we've got 150 or more years of neglected forests, and so it's going to take probably 150 years to dig ourselves out of it. What you do is you survive, and you do whatever you need to do to survive. And so Ryan can talk about the gas masks and blankets, but I would like to talk about the mitigation, because generally what I attended an inspection recently in the basin for the purposes of evaluating a timber harvest. And the landowner, it's a large parcel of land, and I was literally shocked by the massive amount of dead trees that were growing on the hillside, or I should say no longer growing on the hillside. And when I looked at that problem and looked at the topography and the, just the challenge involved, the cost that's involved, and then understanding that we've really depleted the infrastructure to deal with the biomass, and we've depleted like the market forces that help, cover the cost, because there isn't enough money to like subsidize the management of the land. And so there has to be some other type of economic stimulus to promote the work, to pay for the work. We also don't have enough time, clearly, with the climate change problem and just the general fire problem, which truly, in my view, as a registered professional forester and understanding forest ecology, the problem is the fact that the forest is overstocked, and so that creates the fuel problem. Now, is a couple of degree change going to increase the severity? Probably. Is it going to increase the amount of mortality? Yes. So yes, it is impacting the potential that you have these large damaging wildfires. And these are the kinds of fires where they're not survivable fires, right? That it's the difference between a fire that stays on the ground and burns the lower fuels and doesn't get into the crown fire burning everything in its path. So we don't have enough time, we don't have enough money. It is going to take a concerted effort by the federal land managers, and honestly by every single private property owner that is just not willing to cut that one bush or maybe that 500 bushes. And so, I think about like your defensible space requirements, right, as like the very basic minimum thing that one should do. I drive around in the community, I have friends and family here, and I travel here, you know, just as much as anybody else. And what I see is that there's a large number of homes that are built out of very flammable materials, and it's very nice to look at, and it's very comforting, right? People don't necessarily want to look at a bunch of concrete siding, but, you know, our agency, working with our partner, the State Fire Marshal's Office, you know, we do come up with these building standards that help a home be more likely to survive a fire. And we talk about home hardening. Well, home hardening is making your structure, you know, less likely to ignite. But home hardening and, you know, making your home truly defensible are two different things. It's really important for us to have firewood in the winter if we live up here, right? But also in the summertime, everybody likes to have their lawn furniture. Well, lawn furniture is flammable. And so if you have your flammable lawn furniture and firewood next to a home that even with the 20-minute fire-rated siding, that fire loading is going to overcome that impact, right? And so the chances that we would have a large damaging wildfire is not just driven by the fuels on the mountainside, it's the ember intrusion into the community that then ignites the furniture and the structures. And you know, and I know very little of what happened in Hawaii, but I've seen the dynamic where you have densely populated areas with structures that are built with flammable materials, and it is not a wildfire. It's a fire that's structure to structure. And so you have to be able to break that cycle of ignition, right? And so it truly takes it's like this very complicated problem, right? Maybe artificial intelligence will fix it, I don't know, but it's this extremely complicated problem that requires us, you know, these strategies that are addressing the landscape, they're addressing the home front and everything in between. And then the very last option then is addressing the evacuations and what do I do when I actually am in my vehicle now and the fire is surrounding me, and that's Ryan's piece. Thank you.
The clothing part, the question that you had about clothing, long sleeve cotton, long sleeve natural fiber clothing is what people have been fighting fire in for years. Before we had Nomex, we had jeans, 501 jeans, and cotton long sleeve shirts. As far as your masks, I've never worn one in my career. It's in my opinion that early on in the career, we had these masks that a vendor came out with. They overheated us. We couldn't breathe. We had heat-related issues with them. When you see the firefighters covered up, they have a Nomex shroud over them and good goggles. So my recommendations, and that's my opinion for the masks. I don't know if there's something out there now that's new or better, but we didn't use them for those reasons, overheating. Good goggles and natural fiber clothes, long sleeve cotton. Thank you.
We have 24 questions online and some more in the room, so I'm going to try to expedite this because I know you don't want to stay here all night, but I want to make sure we get all the questions answered. So Sophie, there's some folks over here. Can you get ready to get their questions? And Lindsay, will you go to somebody online?
Yeah, so we've gotten quite a few questions related to fuels management. So appreciate some of those comments, but maybe speak to some of the work that's being done in the area related to fuels management, as well as enforcement of defensible space in neighborhoods. That's come up a few times. My neighbor isn't doing their job. How is that enforced?
I'll kick that off, and you know, like so much has been talked about up here, you know, there are a lot of different agencies involved. You know, there's a lot of different sets of folks that own property, the county included. Not too many board meetings ago, for example, the county invested some additional dollars and was able to secure some grant funding to really aggressively start working on fuels management and defensible space on the county's own properties. You'd be amazed actually how many little bits and pieces of property that the county owns throughout eastern Placer. And, we've really taken an aggressive approach because we feel like, we need to set a good example and be a good neighbor and make sure that we're taking care of our own properties. And I know many of the other agencies are doing the same. I'll switch gears briefly and talk about the other piece. I guess my first suggestion is if something's going on in your neighbor's property, go talk to them. Between the two of you, let's work out, how to get that defensible space. The county's hazardous vegetation ordinance requires defensible space not only on your own property, but if it's impacted into another person's property, that it needs to be done there as well. And I'd like to think in this day and age that we're still good neighbors and we all live up here and understand that risk, and that when we do defensible space, not only are we protecting ourselves, but we're protecting our neighbors and our community. And, I think that should be a conversation that should be well received. If it's not, then I guess that's where unfortunately enforcement starts to come in, and we never like to go down that road, but it is an option, and our code enforcement group in the county is staffing up to start being able to be more responsive to those types of things, because we know it's important. But again, let me just put in a shameless plug for please go meet your neighbor, talk to them about how important that is. That's why we really push the Firewise program, because I think it just helps everybody build a sense of community, kind of a sense that, if we all band together and we all do our little part, we're doing it not only for ourselves, but for our community as a whole, and it's just going to make us all that much more safer. And that, it's that little piece of what Chief Garcia was talking about in terms of, how do we make it so that we can be a fire adapted and a fire resilient community up here.
Yeah, Dave, I'll add to that. There are requirements that the board put in place on short-term rentals as well. So many of our vacation homes, you may live next to one or have one in your neighborhood. They are required to have a defensible space, passing defensible space inspection, and your local fire districts in the county are actively working on those currently. So before they can renew their permit for the year, those properties are inspected and require a passing inspection. So just additional point of property inspection there.
Okay, next question.
Hi, I have a question for you guys. I appreciate everything that you put in place and stuff, but my question kind of is about what are you guys doing as all the present organizations as a cooperative effort? What are you doing to address the overpopulation and the over-tourism that is happening in the area that is going to make all of your protocols and your programs that you have in place virtually impossible to execute in a real-time moment?
Well, I'm going to jump in on this one because the county and the County Board of Supervisors, as well as the regulatory agencies, and we talked earlier about doing a town hall on the redevelopment projects that are being proposed. One of the fascinating statistics that you can go online right now today at laketahoeinfo.com, it's TRPA's website. Traffic is not as bad as it was in the early 2000s. Now, I've always thought that was the case, but look at the numbers on all the entrances and all the traffic counts we get from Caltrans and NDOT. We used to back up from Sunnyside to Dollar Hill every day. I don't know how many of you have lived here as long as I have, but that was very routine. But our tolerance has gone down. People drive too fast. I'm sure we can talk about speed over here. So I want you to look at that website and help me understand, because I keep hearing that traffic is worse than it's ever been, and I go, gosh, there's no data that indicates that. But definitely we have peaking problems, and we have certain areas where people are congregating that they didn't used to. Some of what we've seen is outdoor activities have skyrocketed. more and more people want to get into the outdoors, and the numbers there since COVID have skyrocketed. But our traffic is not back at what it was pre-COVID, and it's far below what it was in 2000, 2005, when my kids were growing up and I was running them all around. So I don't know what to tell you about the sense that there's over-tourism, because we're capped on new development in the basin, but I will do that town hall, and we'll get into a lot more of this data. I think tonight we should focus on fire evacuation and what we brought here, but I'll commit that we'll get that town hall going and have more discussion on what is really happening in our communities that's creating those issues of trash. And people just aren't as courteous to each other as they used to be. We're very angry and tense with each other in ways that I don't remember it ever being. It makes me sad for a lot of reasons. So anyway, I'll commit to that, and we'll go to the next question.
But to
Hi.
follow up on
Thank you,
that, Cindy,
Cindy.
actually with your question too, the tourism on our end, when it comes to, and that's when I kind of show on the map of trying to work with the Airbnb, the vacation homes, the hotels and all that stuff, is at least providing some form of information if they want to be notified on an evacuation, because that way they're being told what's happening. Because again, not being informed is going to create some chaos. And so again, the outreach that we're going to try and work on, trying to get that out there, is one of the things that we'll be working on out of our office.
Thank you, Terry. Great work, all you guys. I know we're all trying to work together on this, and I want to thank everyone for that. I had 4 quick questions, hopefully, here. I wanted to know, what is our current per hour roadway capacity based on a phased evacuation from like 2 different egresses? I know you've looked at different scenarios, and I'm just wondering if you have those numbers. You talk about roadway capacity. I'm just wondering what the numbers are.
I'll jump in there. You said you had other questions, so maybe we'll address them one at a time.
Okay.
But I'll jump
You
in
want
there.
that
So
one? Sure.
again, Stephanie Holloway, I'm your deputy CEO. I'm also a traffic engineer, and so I'm happy to address this. And I'll just kind of echo what Cindy said. During an emergency situation, during an evacuation, we are really relying on our professionals to make those decisions. The roadway capacity question is really more of a roadway design issue, right? So we design roads based on, how fast, how congested, that our level of service, essentially, what is acceptable for our communities. And so I can give you those numbers, but again, they're theoretical in the sense that, we're using them to design roadways. The management of that roadways, it is a factor that plays into that in an emergency situation, but it is one factor that the decision makers in the incident are dealing with and looking at. So I will tell you, a 1-lane road in one direction handles about 1,200 vehicles per hour. So again, expand that into a 2-lane road. Again, theoretical, you could basically double that. But again, just to kind of grain of salt, those are design level numbers and not necessarily operational numbers.
Okay, great. Just trying to get an idea of how many people would be able to leave the basin on one egress with the contra and everything, and those numbers really being studied. Because really in a scenario, I don't think that a phased evacuation is realistic. It is if everyone's in their home and everyone is ready and everyone is aware. But with 40,000 tourists in town, I just don't think that's realistic. So that's one of the reasons why I asked that question. Another question was, I understand that the different jurisdictions are on different evacuation platforms. One's on perimeter platform, and Placer was deciding on one. I think we talked about the evacuation platform that you guys have decided on. Is that correct?
So we have a Everbridge, which we adopted back in 2013. So that's been our, Everbridge is the program that we use that does for Placer Alert. So that's the program that we gone to. As far as Nevada County, Code Red, I think is, Code Red is what they have. I know that El Dorado just recently went to, perimeter is one thing, but that's not their notification. That's, I forgot. spacing on the top of my head, but everyone does have different notifications, when it comes to how we notify the people. And again, that's why we felt it was important, especially for the Tahoe Basin, because so many touch each other, is getting that information out there to who you should register with when it comes to getting that notification.
Okay. The last thing that's really bothered me since I've been back is the fact that firewood, charcoal, and other fire-starting products are sold in the grocery stores during ban times, like now, all the way through red flag. And I've never understood why that's allowed. And California State Parks also sells wood. So what's the deal there?
I think one of the things that we don't want to do is we don't want to control commerce. It's very hard for us to tell a store what they can and can't sell. We have a very good working relationship with the grocery stores up here, and they will during red flag warnings and stuff, they will put signs up there. But we just have a hard time walking to a store and say, you can't sell this. Do we tell them you can't sell oranges or bananas next? I mean, I don't know. So that's where it's a kind of a fine line for us to be able to do that. Our fire restrictions, they're not allowed to use it, but we can't control what they can and cannot sell.
So is there a way of at all legislating that in or something? It just seems like a very important thing, especially in such a fire.
I mean, I can check into legislation. I do know that in talking over the years and watching the dialogue about state parks and when they allow fires and when they don't, and there's been a huge debate for many, many years. Even in my previous career, we had the Lake Forest campground that we were managing. And so I was often involved in these discussions. I think that one of the things I learned through that process is very few fires escape from an official campground or a camp ring. Where we see wildland fires, most are either illegal fires. That was Angora, right? It was back in the woods, and it was started without, it was illegal where they were camping and what they were doing. The other is obviously what we've heard the most tragedies about are the power lines or some sort of power infrastructure. So I'm happy to check on this again. I tried to do it on rafts because I was asked about all the plastic rafts on the Truckee River and trying to regulate that because there was some really lots of trash on the Truckee River from those rafts that don't make it down the river, and yet when the rafters aren't rafting, people still want to go in the river. And I was told no, that we can't do that regulation, but I'm happy to at least raise it to our assembly members, see if there's an interest there.
Especially if it's such a safety issue.
Right. And did you have a fourth question?
Really quickly,
Oh,
sorry. I haven't spoken yet, so I feel like I have to say something and I can speak to this. I wanted to share, there are some things that we are not in control of, right? As Chief Layton pointed out. But what we are in control of, at least the local municipalities and even CAL FIRE, we can make sure that we have the same messaging when it comes to the burn ban and putting it in place at the same time, so that no matter where you are, we have the same ban at the same time. And then also enforcement. I know that every jurisdiction is doing their best to enforce within their jurisdictions, right? That burn ban. So, thank you.
Okay. Do we have more questions here in the room? And then we'll go back online too.
Hi, I'm the head of the Firewise Committee of Agate Bay, and we have many of our members here, and we've really done a lot of work in our neighborhood, and we keep our heads up really high. And I had two questions, and one is that unfortunately I've read probably too much about the Lahaina fires, and it started 40 miles away from the actual city of Lahaina, and it was from, my understanding is from electrical lines that fell during the winds, and the power company, Maui Electric, did not turn off the power in time. So by the time people got messaging or they should have gotten messaging. There was no electricity, and there was no cell phones, and there's no internet. So nobody got any messaging. What do we do in that scenario? You have all your systems set, but what makes me really nervous is that how do we find out where to go? And you can send your sheriff's cars up there, but there's not enough to send into Old County and to Agate Bay. And, you know, how are we all going to know where to go if there's no cell phone? That's a big issue for me. So that's my main concern.
So I'm fortunate enough to work in CAL FIRE before cell phones were invented. So I'll give it a try with this. When we're managing the fire and we're managing the evacuations, we split the fire up like a pie, and each piece of the pie is a division. And that division has a supervisor that's in charge of that area and will be notifying whether it's a fire engine or law enforcement. We'll still go door to door, and we'll be on the loudspeakers, and we'll have the fire guys out talking to people, telling them where to go, and getting them out as efficiently as possible. And we've been doing that for years. CAL FIRE's experts at evacuations, and a lot of the times the cell phones are the first things to go down. Radios, on the other hand, if you look at these pictures up here all around the lake, on the high points, we have different repeater sites. So one repeater site can go down, and we can switch traffic to what we call another tone that's all the way on the other side of the lake, but it still shadows us where we're at. So we'll have perfect communications. So when the cell phones go down, we have, like I said, radios. And then on top of that, if the repeaters go down, we still have two-way line of sight radios. And we'll just bring it back to the divisions and the communications and the unified command, and each one of the divisions reporting back and keeping all the communications open.
And like I say, with the sheriff's office, you know, with law enforcement, is, you know, going back to the basics. I mean, again, yes, I worked too before cell phones started, you know, when it came to doing stuff, and it truly was the door to door, you know, obviously getting enough resources in to know and understand how many we're supposed to put into a roadway. And that's where actually some of the pre-incident maps that we're working on, it's going to be a paper map for Unified Command. We've identified the amount of residents that are on a roadway. So if you have 5 or you have 30, it helps us make that decision of how many I have to send down to do an effective, you know, door-to-door search. Again, when we talk about mutual aid is a very large resource when it comes to getting a lot of resources in. And I know up here, obviously, you know, down in, you know, on the west side, you know, you have Roseville, Sacramento, Rockland, you have a much larger pool, but you do have a pretty good pool up here when it comes to a massive emergency and calling for that mutual aid. And then our unified command that we've been doing, it's nothing new for us. We've been doing it for many years and perfecting it. But, you know, you know, when you pull the big red handle for a large quantity of people, we can get 40 to 50 officers, you know, in a pretty, you know, quick response. And then that's when we work with our unified command, is directing those to the areas that need that door to door, if that's the only way we're going to be able to do that notification.
So some of the other things, you know, your question was, we don't have cell phones. How do we notify you? How do you get notified? The power's out, right? You're up, and by the way, thank you for the work that you do in Agate Bay. You're in my district, and I appreciate all the work that you guys do. Radio stations, FM radio stations, we have contacts where we can call them quickly and they can put a message out. Also, you see our sign trailers, they have a message on them, the Caltrans sign that's above when you come into Highway 89. North Tahoe Fire has 5 of those that we strategically place throughout the district. They're up now in different places. So we can quickly move those to one area and say, do this or do that. I mean, yeah, we all rely on cell phones so much, but we have to have a backup plan for a backup plan, basically.
Online, do we have another question?
There's been a few questions related to clean air buildings. You know, are there any buildings that would be designated for people to be in during high smoke? Dave, I see you raise your hand. Go ahead and speak to that.
So the You know, unfortunately, you know, with the fires last year, I think we all felt that impact from those fires. Another grant program that we have been successful at in Placer OES is developing essentially a shelter for wildfire smoke, and we have been able to secure, and I hope our equipment here arrives here soon, but the ability to have air purifiers and filters and things like that. We've looked at different buildings that are available to us, and we've sized that equipment, and essentially we can create respite centers, if you will, for folks if they're having trouble. Now, again, I think in a lot of those situations, probably you'll hear from our public health officer and air pollution that the best place for you to be is at home, inside. But if for some reason that's something that isn't working for you, then we'll have those types of facilities. I'll also, again, if you do find yourself in those kind of situations, we partner with 211. We'll get them the information about options for you. So again, I'd ask you to just, get in the habit of thinking about 211 when you need those types of resources, because we can engage our partners with the COAD or with Truckee or wherever we need to help with those things. But we have actually thought about that as kind of a new sort of facet maybe that we haven't seen at such a high level as we have in the past.
I have two questions. One, in the evacuation, were you looking at or considering the backfire roads, the ski runs, to evacuate people with four-wheel drives? Most of us have those up here. And second, most of our homes are second homes. They're vacant a lot, and it doesn't seem like anyone has really put together protocols on how to shut down your home when it's vacant. We've always turned off the water, but, I'd always thought it would have been a good idea to turn off the natural gas too. I've never seen anything on instructions on how to do it, or if there's protocols, there modifications that we need to make to our homes so we could shut off the natural gas.
Well, no, as far as I'll speak to the 4x4 part of it. Any 4x4 roadway out in the middle of the woods is pretty much our non-recommended route when it comes to it. Again, when you're trying to move a lot of traffic and trying to get people out, 4x4 single lane road, there's a little more recipe for disaster. Obviously, you're in an area that's probably not mitigated as much on the side of the roadways, more defensible space on the roadway when it comes to those single lane roads. But when it comes down, like what the chief talked about earlier, is doing what you need to do to survive. And if you ever find yourself in that situation where there's no other alternative and of these roads, again, you got to do what you got to do to survive. But that's obviously something that we don't recommend when it comes to sending people down a roadway that's not meant for traffic.
I'll just add to that. We do, if there's fires out in rural areas, we use Forest Service roads. They're not four-wheel drive roads, but they're dirt roads. And as long as we know where the starting point is and the ending point, we can recommend that. But just wanted to touch on just due diligence and sound situational awareness. Everybody in this room's been up here long enough to know that if we do have fire weather, there's going to be something that says that there's a fire weather watch, fire weather warning. It's super dry out. It's super windy. So just on those nights, crack a window open, listen for sirens, things like that. Just the old school due diligence and situational awareness.
I think one of your other questions was, how do we secure our homes when we leave, right? And so I wouldn't suggest turning your gas off unless you're trained to do that. So you turn it off, and then when you come back in, you have to turn it on, and that could be problematic. I think some of the stuff is make sure your house is secured. We have a problem occasionally where bears will break into houses because they're not secured, and they have started fires. So make sure your house is secure. Make sure, we talked about your furniture, like your deck furniture. Put it away so it's not creating. If you weren't home and there was a fire that came through, it wouldn't contribute to the fire load on your deck. Make sure your decks are clear. So just common sense things like that, I think would help.
Chief Layton, can I put in a pitch from your local water purveyor? when you're prepping your house, don't turn on your sprinklers. Don't put a sprinkler on your roof. It will not make any difference in any way whatsoever about defending your house, but what it will do is tax the water system. During both Angora and Caldor, South Tahoe PD had crews driving around the community turning water off because people turned on their sprinklers, they put hoses on their roof, and that was draining the water system. So please don't do that. As you're prepping your house, turn your water off. Use your customer shutoff valve that you have.
Other questions here in the room? Sophie, where's the mic? Oh, Danielle?
Thanks. Thank you for the thoughtful conversation tonight. I think we've made a lot of progress over the years in this conversation. I've been involved heavily with many of you in this, and I'm really grateful for tonight. One thing Dave mentioned earlier about coordinating with public transit. One of the lessons learned out of the Caldor fire was that we needed closer coordination between our public transit system and our public safety. In particular, there was a lot of issues where dispatch received calls for support for people that did not have a vehicle, and then worked with the Tahoe Transportation District to have their on-demand services go and try and get those people a ride, including their pets, their luggage, whatever they needed to get out of the basin. They actually evacuated and rehomed 485 people during the Caldor fire. I would love to see Placer County work with TRPA staff who has actually collected some of the data about people who do not have vehicles, and you can actually understand what locations you need to prioritize that support. I do think that the TART Connect would be an added benefit to really look at how you could coordinate with them, because our transit service is really limited, and that was a challenge. TTD did not have all the services. They actually went and worked with Douglas County School District to actually gather more transit services to do that. I think there's opportunity to go there and actually really do an evaluation of how to improve that piece of the evacuation. Second, I'm wondering if Placer County is looking at the code for some of the larger properties that are a little bit more difficult for the vegetation mitigation. There are requirements that go out to 100 feet on some of those, but there are several large properties that actually really need some significant work that I've worked the last 10 years trying to get some support to try and make that happen. I would love to see if we had policy that captures the entire type of properties that are in our area. Have you thought about amending the code so that they can do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dave touched on it, just the overall network of properties that Placer is inventorying and then also prioritizing that. So, I think to answer your question, Danielle, and I'll let Dave chime in too, we're definitely eyes on that. And Dave, I don't know if you have any additional information.
And I think the other piece of that too is, is providing support, and this is where the RCDs, both Placer and Tahoe RCD, there's a lot of great programs they have for larger landowners to help them better manage their properties. Certainly if folks find themselves in those situations, we'd be happy to help you get in touch with folks who can help with that, because it's one thing to mandate it. It's another thing to be in a position to be able to get the work done. So wanting to kind of provide both sets of that, I think, is important.
And on the part where you talked about being communication with transportation, that's our role especially with this new model that we have, that we're immediately embedded into the unified command and being that liaison. And our job is to find out what's needed to support the incident, and then that's where we work together at getting those liaisons for each one of those, the PUDs, Liberty and TART, and a representative there, so that way we can do one-way communication to mitigate those issues that come up.
So once we have an evacuation, we follow the people, and from their house to the shelter or to the new home that they're going to. So we involve HHS. So HHS tracks the people that are at need or at risk or don't have vehicles, and start us off in the right direction, and then we'll go out to the mass transit and see what we can get drivers And like Ty said, we'll liaise between the event and HHS to the tier, what is it, TT? TART, to TART. Thanks.
Thank you. Sue?
Yes, thank you so much, everybody. A task well thought out, well planned, as long as we don't encounter human nature and panic. With Caldor, of course, people had time. They knew the fire was coming for 2 weeks, so it was easier to get out of the basin. It depends where our fire starts, of course, you know, and I know that that's going to make a big difference. So what I'd like to know is, and you don't have to answer it today because you probably don't have the answer, but before North Tahoe High School was opened, and before it was ever going to be allowed to be open, there was going to be another road out of that neighborhood. So I would like to have you plan for it, because I don't think shelter in place would be proper, depending, of course, where the fire starts, because every mother in the basin will be driving up there to get their kid, and you will have something to deal with. My other comment, and you probably have taken care of it, but you have off-site phone centers and stuff. When you turn 911 off of the mountain, we had a lot of 911 calls where the receptionists, the people working there, did not know the area, did not know what was going on and such. So I just want to draw your attention to that, because it did cause a lot of 911 problems. And since, you know, we're relying on that kind of communication, I think it's really important to address it and do it well. Panic will happen, especially if it's a fast fire. You look at Paradise. I used to live in Paradise. That went really fast. If you weren't out of town in 90 minutes, you weren't out of town. And that's too fast for the thousands and thousands of people we might have here. So again, depending where the fire starts. Washoe Fire, Cindy, when you were talking about the charcoal in that barbecue that did start, I think if we mandate people to do defensible space.
It was a leaky propane tank, by the way.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but it was from a barbecue, right? Yeah. So it went fast. It went right up the hill. Your scenario showed the fire going into the mountains, but it really will go up to Tahoe City. So what I would like to see, though, is that we can mandate the grocery stores not to sell those products if we mandate the homeowners not, or to do defensible space. It's the same kind of thing. I think we can do it. Rayleigh's Market is very cooperative, by the way. It's Safeway that we have to deal with. So thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Another question?
We do have one hand raised online. Should we go to them first? Kathy Haywood, if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask your question. Kathy Haywood, if you can hear us and you want to unmute yourself, you can ask your question. All right.
Okay, we'll move back here. Ma'am, you have a question?
I just wanted to mention that I'm a little disappointed because I don't see North Tahoe Fire on this panel. And I don't know, okay,
The
there he
chief is right here.
All right, we have one, yay. So the other question I have is about the plantations, the lumber plantations between here and Auburn, and are they being held to standards? You were talking about the groups of dead trees. I mean, you can see them from the air. We're being encouraged to harden and all that. But what about the plantation owners? Don't they have a responsibility to dismantle all of these dead trees?
I might jump in because I did a aerial tour of that area, and I'm sure others have as well. SPI, the largest private landowner in the state of California, does an incredible job taking care of their forests because that's their product that they're selling. So I think what you're seeing are dead trees on public lands, and that is a huge issue. And this is what we've been fighting for hard, to get more funding to the Forest Service and to state parks for their lands to get treated. Especially on the western slope, much of the district I represent through Forest Hill and Elta, Dutch Flat, all those areas are very concerned about the Forest Service lands that are adjacent to theirs. So we're working hard, and what we've done with our CAL FIRE funding that we got several years ago is create a shaded fuel break from Colfax all the way down to down to Auburn. And on the River Canyon edge, and I don't know, Steve, or do you know how wide that shaded fuel break is? I forget the statistics, but millions have been invested in that project. It was a high priority project from the governor's office and through CAL FIRE that we funded that and did the work. But this work doesn't stop. It has to be maintained. And so we need to keep planting the seed. I think, just so you know as well, with the wildfires that we, first time ever, most of us in our lifetime have heard about Canadian wildfires, and then looking at the smoke impacts on the East Coast, we hope that that will jar more political leadership to put funding to the Forest Service so they can manage their forests again.
So write to our representatives and state senators and say,
Absolutely.
fund the tree removal?
Yes,
Okay.
especially our federal representatives. I would urge you to do that. I know they hear us, but the more constituents they hear from is always a good thing. Okay. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank all of you for the time you spend and the job you do every day. Thank you. My wife and I know what we're going to do because we're on the North Tahoe Fire CERT team. We train every month. We train a lot of the things we've been hearing here tonight. We're always looking for volunteers, so if someone wants to have a conversation with me here tonight, I'd be happy to do that, or go on the North Tahoe Fire website and join the team.
I think Nylita and Dick have done more volunteer work in this community than any other couple I know. Any other questions? Any final questions? Yes, there's one right behind you, Sophie, and then in the back of the room.
Thank you. Is there outreach and emergency messaging in place for our Spanish-speaking community?
So that's one of the big things. One of our drivers for wanting to partner with the COAD is to be able to better engage our non-English speaking communities. You know, Spanish is certainly a big one, especially I know in the Kings Beach area, for example, but just trying to be able to just better connect with all of our communities where, you know, the traditional methods of outreach just don't seem to reach like we really want to. And so that's where our partnership with those groups is really important. And actually, we just had a little bit of a conversation about that just the other day about how to bolster our Spanish and other language type outreach.
There's just happened to be, we had a regional chiefs meeting this morning, and a gal that represented Living with Fire, which is an organization out of the University of Nevada that encompasses the basin, both sides. She just announced that all their resources, all their informational resources are in both English and Spanish now. So Living with Fire, it's a great resource. Go to that website and pass the word on that.
I can speak to that question too with the COAD. We are partnering currently with Sierra Community House to make sure that we're getting the message out to the community. We hear that it's a lot of word of mouth, so our strategy right now is to go into places that people are gathering, different, outreach events, and talking about preparedness, helping people sign up for alerts. What do you put in your go bag? Talk to your family. So we are working on those efforts. Thanks.
And I'll just mention that State of California is helping us with some outreach through Listos, which is another large organization that helps us with our Spanish-speaking populations.
I'm going to jump in. There's two questions written in online. One, if someone could discuss planning for animal evacuations, and then another question, a few questions around alarm sirens. Is there any thoughts to put something like that into our area for additional communication?
So we just actually had a training, a few different things when it comes to animals. Again, we have animal control will be a liaison in with Unified Command, especially when dealing with animals and trying to get animals out, or even care after the fact when people get evacuated and they start worrying about their animals and where they're at. During mosquito fire, we use them extensively. And then you have people that, some of the bigger areas, they might have cattle or they might have some agricultural. We have it's called an ag pass. It's actually something they have to have a training with. They get an ag pass where they can come and bypass the roadblock to go get the cattle or livestock that they have. So there are definitely options when it comes to it, but animal control is going to be our primary resource when it comes to being a liaison at the command post.
And just like other things that were talked about tonight, mutual aid is a really important part of our kind of tools in our toolbox. And just like fire and law enforcement, there's a whole mutual aid system that we're putting together in the state of California for animals. We actually sheltered more animals in the mosquito fire than we did people by about 4 or 5 to 1. So it's definitely on our radar, something that we need to bolster our efforts.
And then, Ty, do you want to take the alarms, the sirens, or just, I'm sorry.
Yes, sorry. And then as far as the alarms go, that's one thing, really comes down to, we've changed the dynamics, and I know it's totally opposite of fires, but like in schools, when it comes to active shooters and stuff like that, we've gone more to that plain text when it comes to information, because when you hear those I remember when I was a kid, you hear those alarms go off, you go tone deaf to the alarm because you hear it getting tested all the time. And what kind of information are you getting from that? And that's where I think the high-low siren is really going to be effective, because that's the only time we don't drive around your neighborhood and test it. So it's only going to be used during that time. And so that's, again, where the kind of resource that we use when it comes to that type of alarm system.
I can share something about sirens. If we're talking about sirens like air raid sirens, North Star actually happens to have one of those. And I think it was 5 years ago, we decided we should probably test this siren, make sure it still works. And we should do it on a day in which, at that time, I wasn't the fire chief, but I was the division chief. And let's test this when we are meeting with our district's largest homeowners association, and they can hear this siren. And so we set it up at this meeting, and then we said, now listen to the siren. And no one could hear the siren. The siren went off, and it was extremely loud on top of our fire station. But you couldn't hear it just maybe 1/8 of a mile up the block, and that's because of the topography that you're dealing with here. So we thought, well, let's run some studies. Let's hire someone to come in and see what can be done. And once again, topography came out as the #1 issue. You can put sirens in. We could put sirens in, but the sirens that we would have to put in, and as you know, North Star is one of the smaller districts within the Tahoe Truckee area. They would be astronomical in cost, something that we could not afford. So, and I imagine that even maybe the larger districts would find it difficult to put sirens in so that they would work and be heard. So.
One more online, and then there's one in the back. Julie, go ahead. You've been waiting a while.
Yeah, quick. It might be a little bit of a stretch or off topic, but since so much of the information being disseminated depends on having a good cell signal, are there any federal programs or ways for rural areas like ours to get support in improving our cell phone signals and technology? Because on a busy weekend, they suck. So if everybody's trying to get online to get all this information, there's a good chance it's not going to work.
So there are funds in the American Rescue Plan dedicated to broadband, and Placer County received quite a bit. funding through that, and there's more coming from the CPUC. They receive the lion's share of that funding. Unfortunately, our area, not enough people participated in the survey to show that we had as much need as other areas of the county. We have needs throughout our rural communities, but right now, I think it's about 19 or 20,000 homes that we are spending funds, and we're matching the provider with construction of new infrastructure in those areas in our most limited areas. We actually have better cell service, I will tell you, driving through parts of my district than other areas of my district. So, but we are going to continue because there's still another, I think it's $30 million that we should be allocated from ARPA funds for broadband increases. And I'm pushing really hard to get more of that invested up here.
Great, great. And I just I don't know if anybody can answer this. We have different cell phone companies up here in towers. In an emergency situation, like can it work that everybody gets the same signal? That like someone who has T-Mobile isn't getting a lesser service than one of the other carriers or something? Or is it always going to be just, is there any emergency system for that?
Dave, your light's on. I hope you know, because I don't know.
So unfortunately, there's not interoperability, which is the term for kind of that between different cell phone, AT&T and Verizon. They were built on completely different concepts. So unfortunately, no. The one saving grace, I guess I will say, is, and Lieutenant Connors touched on that, in that kind of that worst case scenario where we absolutely have to get in touch with folks, there is the wireless emergency alert, and that will go out on from every tower to every phone that's on and can hear that signal. So that's unfortunately why, when Nevada County made the choice to use that, I saw posts of people in Reno all the way down to Granite Bay got that signal. So it's got a pretty long reach. But again, that's why we try to use it sparingly, because that can obviously cause confusion.
Okay, great. And one other question on the Forest Service and is there increased enforcement of illegal camping and campfires? Because like we just had one right up on the top of Dollar Hill, and it was just, I saw it on social media, but people caught the people and they took off, and it's like, I know the Forest Service does patrol to some degree.
They are doing patrols, and does local law enforcement get involved if somebody sees something, Ty?
Like if we get a call where it's a law enforcement issue, of course, if the Tahoe National, we work closely with Tahoe National Forest with their law officers. They're very limited to how many there are. I think you have one guy that kind of patrolling a large area. But we work with them closely. If he does receive a call or they receive anything and they need assistance, then they call for us, and we'll go out there and help with that enforcement. So just because they're not available, our law enforcement can also do the same. CAL FIRE also has their law enforcement as well, when it comes to doing some type of enforcement for illegal camping.
So how comfortable should we, the public, be that with the fact that there are a lot of people illegally camping and starting campfires, that there's somebody keeping an eye on that, or that we, the general public, if we see?
We have to be a big part of this, Julie.
Okay.
I know the forest supervisor, Eric Walker, I was talking to him about some illegal camping, and that particular instance, he said it's like whack-a-mole. If they will go out, they will get them pushed off one area, and these people go to somewhere else and set up camp. It's happening around our forest, and I think the best thing is that we have so many active recreationalists up here. It's another reason to ride your mountain bike and get out or hike. And if you see something, say something so that we can look into it and we can get that exact location to them. But I know that they are really limited, and maybe they haven't asked for enough assistance.
I was just going to say, can we do something about this? Because it seems like enforcement of our laws and our regulations is a major problem in Placer County in many different ways.
Yeah, I will certainly look at what we can do on Forest Service lands to help them or to I guess, augment what we can do there.
Well, I know that in Forest Hill, they have a lot of problem with speeders, and CHP doesn't have someone assigned up there, and it kind of was explained to me that they're kind of like, if they want to do some type of direct enforcement because they have a particular area that has a lot of problems, it's going to take those constant phone calls going in to create that, kind of like, okay, this is a specific area that they have to do some direct enforcement, and maybe they can get some funding and stuff like that when it comes to doing the overtime for it. So that was kind of explained to me sometimes with some of the limited resources, is like, Cindy said, is you see something, say something, and keep it going. Because if you're a gnat, we all want to kill a gnat, right? So, it's if you're doing it enough,
or the squeaky wheel gets oiled. Is
is
that
that a better way of doing it?
Yeah.
Maybe we don't want to kill. I don't know. Maybe
Well,
we do want to kill
we've
gnats.
talked about the fact that this is one of the major causes of wildfires. So
Right.
And as someone on the panel there said,
Yep.
it's about mitigation rather than evacuation. We should be mitigating these problems.
Right.
Rather than talking about
I
evacuation.
put it on the follow-up list to talk to Eric more about what we need to do to help either supplement his budget or get his people to call our folks sooner. Because I know
Okay.
that one was really there for quite a while.
And I have one more just kind of morbid question. I read somewhere that like in a fire, like suffocation is really more what kills people rather than burning up. So when you're, like, we live in the Dollar Hill Lake Forest area, we're close to the lake. So I think if there's traffic on the road, the inclination for people in that neighborhood is going to be to run down to the lake. Is suffocation not a worry because Tahoe, the lake is so big that there would be enough oxygen there, or is that a worry? And is that why, like, and I agree what you said, it probably will be windy and wavy and a major scene down there and cold, but we're on a 2-lane road. You showed great graphics of getting out on 89, but getting out on 28 from Dollar, if you can only go one direction, is going to be scary. So, anyone have a comment on whether we're going to suffocate down at the lake or should we suffocate in our car?
I guess I'll take that. Somebody that's been on many wildland fires, the air's not great, it's hot, your eyes burn, but, on these far and few between times that you might be exposed to it, unless you have a pre-existing health condition, some respiratory issues, something like that, and depends if you're like right in the line of like a drainage and it's funneling right down at you, I think chances are pretty. No, that won't be an issue. No, but if you have, a lot of people have N95s in their drawers right now or something like that. That's it's something to consider. Nah.
We have one more with their hand raised online while Sophie's walking. Shannon, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, everybody. I've been noticing online on the comments section, which I had a question about, a lot of our Tahoe Conservancy lots are really not being managed right now. And when I have personally called, I've been told they don't have the time, the money. It's like going to happen in like 4 years, 3 years, something like that. And it's a lot of these lots are adjacent to houses. And so I was wondering, so we can write letters for our Forest Service, which I'll gladly do. But what do we do about Tahoe Conservancy when these are in our neighborhoods and touching our lots as well? Thank you.
Okay, that's another one for me because I get to wear all kinds of hats. These guys get one or two, but I also serve on the Conservancy Board. We have a pretty aggressive program right now of funding from the state to take care of those lots, but we're doing it in phases. So if you don't mind emailing my office, let me know where yours is, where the lots are that are concerning you specifically. I can find out where they're at in the time frame of what the Conservancy, when the Conservancy is going to get to those.
So my question was really more of an idea, and hearing about the sirens and the signals and thinking about the high-low sounds. would it be possible to have that, that siren built onto one of the ships or the boats that does go on the water? Because when sound is on the water, it carries a long ways. You think about the fireworks at different cities that you can hear that are along the lake. And so it just made me wonder, what if some of the partners that have boats, partner agencies that have boats, could have that high-low siren installed so that they could be amplifying it in addition to the car that is going around in the residential areas.
One thing about, like, say, just how you talked about, though, on the waterway, it gets projected. So the only thing is projecting how far or in the wrong direction. And now you might be creating a little more confusion because more people can hear it when we're actually trying to focus in to an actual area.
But I think it sounds like a great idea, though, if you know and you can control it, because I hadn't thought of that, but I'm sure, but Don's gonna.
Sorry, I'm jumping in on this one. I'm your station commander here. Our Marine 6 does have that siren already, just so you know.
Are you ready? Any other questions?
I got one more
Okay,
for you to
one
consider.
question,
Cindy. Not a
Danielle.
question, something to consider. We have had these discussions in the past about a Rule 20D, like San Diego Gas and Electric has for undergrounding related to wildfire. We do have scenic mitigation for undergrounding utilities, but we don't have the Rule 20D piece of it here. And that could be, I know that might make Liberty a little nervous, but I think it is something worth considering. It has been quite successful in Southern California.
Great, thank you. Any other final comments or questions here in the room or online? Thank you. Well, thank these people who do this work every day. And I really appreciate everybody's patience. We've been here for 2.5 hours, and stomachs are probably growling, but I really appreciate the time. This is such an important issue for our community, and I want you to know we take it very seriously, all of us up here and so many more. So thank you for coming tonight and listening and being so polite and civil. Not all of the conversations I get to have are this nice, so I appreciate it very, very much. And stay safe, get your house prepared, and please, ask us questions or report issues you see to my office. I'll get it to whomever we need to get it to. So thank you.